Hi, I'm Jenny. I'm a counselor from Horizon and I specialize in trauma work. And today I just wanted to share um, uh, some psychoeducation and some information that I have found to be really orientating and really helpful for people who've experienced trauma in terms of understanding their symptoms and what happens when they're triggered and what happens in their nervous system, and that this information can really give them a way to really understand themselves better so they can actually ground themselves. And currently, in the situation that we're dealing with, this pandemic and the uncertainty of what's happening and what's going on, we're all experiencing trauma at times. So I find that this can be so valuable for everyone to really understand the way our nervous systems work and to be able to really track what's happening within our nervous system. That's certainly what has been most valuable for myself and what I've certainly noticed in clients. So I'm just going to hold up the flip chart. This comes from Janina Fisher, so I really want to reference her and say how great this information is. So this essentially is showing us what happens with our nervous system after we experience trauma, which can be after we've just even experienced a trigger. So first of all, this is just what we call the window of tolerance. So this is a place where we're able to function day to day when we feel like we can make the appropriate decisions, we can plan, we can think about other people, we can problem solve. It's when we feel connected to what some people call our wise mind, when we're able to have an emotion like sadness or fear or joy, and also be able to think at the same time and stay functioning and stay present. Above that, when we get triggered, we often go into what's called hyperarousal, and signs of this are feeling emotionally overwhelmed, panic, impulsivity, hypervigilance, defensiveness. We get really angry. We can feel unsafe all the time, fidgety. We can't sit still. We're always looking around. Have difficulty relaxing, reactive, angry, racing thoughts. We may have panic attacks. And often when we're hyper aroused, it's very difficult to sleep or to relax at all. And then what can happen is that can be so overwhelming for our nervous system to stay in that state forever that eventually we crash and we plunge and a different part of our nervous system takes over and we go into what's called hypoarousal. And both of these states are protective states. When we feel like we're under threat and we're in danger, these states are certainly, they're part of our fight, flight, freeze, survival response, and they're really meant to help us survive. The problem is when it's a trigger and we're not actually in physical danger, and we stay in these states, they're actually not healthy for us to be in this state all the time. So when we can become aware and know what we can do to calm ourselves, when we're either hyper aroused or hypo aroused, that's really where the value of this lies. And certainly, unless we're in immediate physical danger, when we are within our window of tolerance, we're certainly able to think and plan and problem solve much more appropriately, and so deal with the current stressors that we're experiencing in our lives. So it's more adaptive to be within this window of tolerance. So we're just looking at ways that we can either reduce our hyperarousal or hypoarousal and come back into the window of tolerance more often. And for people who've experienced trauma, that can take a while. So I encourage you not to judge yourself, because that judgment in itself can be a trigger for us, and then that can lead us to be more hypervigilant because we have these negative thoughts that we're constantly turning towards ourselves. And what we just want to do is some gentle things, and we can talk about that after, that just start to slowly lower our hyperarousal or raise the hypoarousal and bring us back into the window of tolerance. So the hypoarousal is that we Might feel numb, dead, passive, no feelings. So this is just really where we're just not feeling much. We have very little energy. We can't climb out of bed. Depressive feelings are usually associated with hypoarousal. Our thinking is slowed, or we may feel we can't think at all. We have difficulty thinking. We may even have difficulty speaking during this time, difficulty with language. We can feel really disconnected, shut down, like we're not really there, we're not really present. And shame is often associated with this stage. So a lot of feelings of shame can come up, and we just want to hide. And it's also a time where it's difficult to say no because we do feel so passive. So setting boundaries can be really difficult in this stage, which makes it hard for us to protect ourselves. And at certain times, this was functional for our nervous system. It rises out of the time when we, if we were threatened by an animal, and there's no other resort, we may have actually played dead. We become that passive and our whole nervous system shuts down. But most of the time, that's not actually healthy for us now. And so again, there's no judgment in this. Our nervous system is really trying to help us. It's trying to help us survive. And so what I find helpful is, first of all, when you can see this and you can track this and notice these patterns within yourself, just by starting to say, oh, now I'm really hyper aroused. I'm really panicked. What can I do to bring myself back into the window of tolerance? You're giving yourself some language and ways to label what's happening for you. And that is one way to help be connected to your wise mind, when we can start to label what's happening. Dan Siegel, a researcher, psychiatrist, talks about name it to tame it. So just by starting to name what's happening, we can connect to the wise mind part of ourselves and and bring ourselves back into that window of tolerance and tame that panic. In the same way with the hypoarousal. So when we can start to notice these signs, it's really valuable. And you can see that people who experience trauma, often they just go back and forth, up and down, and they don't spend much time in the window of tolerance. And so just if you identify with that, just validating that is part of the trauma, and that's not a forever thing, that can be changed. And doing simple calming exercises can be really valuable, and we'll talk about some more of what those are in another video. But just things that can help you bring yourself back into the window of tolerance. So what I encourage you to think of is just noticing this and starting to track where you are, and looking to see if there's anything that you can do that might feel calming or soothing for yourself when you notice that you're maybe outside of your window of tolerance. And just notice how it feels to see this, if it feels more settling to be able to represent yourself here and know that this is a normal trauma response and it's not permanent. It can be changed. Our brains and our nervous systems are very, very adaptable, and that's what's so great. So I hope this has been helpful. Thank you.